Brilliant. So there's a few more slides in the deck that will be shared afterwards. Then I will go through today. I'm conscious we have limitations, but I just wanted to touch on, before we talk about load shedding, because it's not as simple as here's a graph, enjoy it. We need to talk about how do we get to the data that informs really the scenarios that talk to load shedding. So just a bit of background on Cresco and where the data is coming from. So we are typically involved 12 months to 18 months before these projects get to financial close. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been very involved as transactional advisors, helping large buyers of power, mining clients, data centers in procuring energy. Very much trying to build the bilateral market that has now moved into the aggregator market. And then we have this concept of trading. So this is a bit of a marketing slide that talks about the work that we've been doing. But out of this process, we've ended up with a database of about 250 utility scale projects with names, faces, tariffs, permits, and that. And this has really formed the basis of a lot of our analysis and projections that have come out. In addition to that, we recently had Shirley Sovaldi join us, the Eskom pricing lady, and she's also brought an interesting dynamic to the Cresco team in terms of trying to understand it from the other side of the table. So to talk about how do we get with pricing and how does this work and where does the market going, these are some of our clients on the left, and this is really a focus on the work we've been doing to get to this moment. So the colors, and some of them a bit garish, so apologies, talk about the work we did in 21, which is offsite, onsite, focused on energy strategy type work, and saying you have 25% target, renewable target is not a strategy, it's a target. We then talked about cogen, peak shaving, how do we use the bases, cross-border wheeling and wheeling security of supply. So all of these concepts are coming into people's considerations. We started touching on ESG and carbon offsets. And in fact, Cresco ourselves bought some RECs to try and understand how the process works. And not a huge amount. We don't have a huge carbon footprint, but we have something there. Now in the recent years, this has gone on sort of steroids, wheeling security of supply. And then now slowly we started talking about balancing charges, time of use tariffs, where the market's going, security of supply from base. And now the big focus really is around the multi-market model, the day ahead, and what is the day ahead pricing. And all of this is premised off some supply demand analysis, which I'll show you and sift through later. We also got to understand the context. So as I mentioned, we have a fairly well established bilateral market, aggregator market. And if you put 10 lawyers in the same room, we might actually agree on 80 or 90% of the terms. And I think this has created a really good stable base for us to now venture into the future. And the future, to a certain extent, is considered this concept of virtual wheeling. So I know Eskom very much has been pushing the virtual wheeling platform as a way of allowing low voltage sites to now wheel within the grid. Normally it's just done on medium voltage. And I know other companies like Vodacom and Discovery, and now people are looking at municipalities and how does the various virtual wheeling platforms work. At the moment, I think it's quite difficult to practically make it work for scale, but I know a lot of good work is being done in terms of trying to make this work, because for us, this allows us to cover low voltage sites as well as municipal connected sites that are not currently there. And now from that, we're taking a huge giant leap in terms of our thinking to this liberalized multi-market model, which is currently the focus of the Cresco team. And our eyes are popping out and our brain is frizzing with trying to understand the concepts that Keith and Bowen and Hans is presenting there. But this is very much now the importance of the supply demand, the load shedding impact. This is really coming out in terms of what will the future look like under a future liberalized market in terms of the demand and supply balance. So we went back to basics. We have used Plexos previously, and we've used Homer and all sorts of osmosis and lots of cool toys there, but unfortunately we've largely focused on an Excel-based solution at this stage. We're not modeling energy flows, we're trying to model energy costs on an all-in tariff basis, not a levelized cost basis, because our world, we work on what is the tariff there. So we've got a basic buildup of domestic demand, energy demand, imports, exports, all the way through to the balance model. Eventually we get the energy deficit or national load shedding or curtailment, depending on who you are on the grid and there. And I assume people understand the difference. Load shedding is if you typically just get shut off, whereas curtailment are largely larger clients who get asked to reduce load. You shouldn't be shutting off mines at short notice. They need to put time to progress. At the moment, this is all done at a national level, but recently we've managed to get a lot of good data at a transmission level, or a sort of transmission zones and provinces are pretty similar, although the demand and the load and the generator are slightly different, but within there. And the next bit of a modeling is to actually analyze this on more of a nodal approach, because in our view, there will be eventually nodal pricing in South Africa based on your demand and your supply configuration. And we recently got some really good data from Eskom, and you can actually see material differences in demand profiles depending on the province, depending on the user profile, and that all feeds into the energy mix. So we had a view in 2024, sorry, one skipped in, and this has now been updated to a new view in September, October side, and there's been key movements. So firstly, we've seen an increase in the private BESS installations out there. We don't really work much on the rooftop. We're really using sort of research data that's out there, but we are working for many data centers and other larger clients, and we're seeing a number of private BESS installations either been put into the ground. MTN has a successful installation at their 14th Avenue site they announced, and we're working with a number of the data centers who are looking at significantly quite large PV and BESS installations relative to what we've seen before. So this has moved forward in the analysis. We think it's coming. We have, however, delayed some of our renewable rollout, and I think that's very much been driven by the fact that it's taking so much longer to get to financial close. One is EPC capacity constraints, final agreeing legal documents, as much as we are getting to a bit of a common PPA approach, but mostly due to grid connection. And the projects that we have in this are actually real names and real faces. So we haven't just gone and said everything's moved by 6 months based on our database of projects we're involved in, or people we're aware of, or press releases, which you can't always believe, but let's go with that. We've delayed the project's implementation, and unfortunately renewables have a bit rolled out to the right from that point of view. We also still, however, see that gas will only be coming in from 2030. So large-scale CCGT type gas has been delays, and I know, Chris, you wrote a very good piece recently on that. I think largely our view and your view is very aligned on that thinking. But the delay in the large-scale gas to balance the grid, and people argue if it's not gas or what, but in our view, it is required to help with the grid, unfortunately, is going to create some significant challenges in the short term. And then we've tried to come up with what we think is a fair view on the coal decommissioning. In our previous assumptions, we used the JET decommissioning plan. Excuse me, Eskom has its own plan. So we've tried to come up with a in-between plan, call it a Cresco view or an average of an average. But we now have access to the EAFs per power station, and based on the delays, we now have a more accurate view. So this has really resulted in some different demand supply imbalances that we had in May, and this is resulting in different views on deficits and curtailments and opportunities. So if we break down, this is really the slide on the previous one on the left with megawatts and now in megawatt hours. You can see, so the coal does come down at a bit of a cliff. You can see gas and other types of technology, so dispatchable technology. So the blue is initially gas, but there's also other dispatchable technologies really increasing to balance the grid. And on an annual basis, if you take the 2023 IRP national demand, we actually seem okay. If you take the Cresco's view of national demand, we also seem okay on an average basis. But if you take what was presented in the IRP 2019, which I think was a demand that needed to would support South African growth, we are far behind in terms of having the energy needs. And there's been a lot of debate at the moment around what is the true demand and what is the reason that we haven't had load shedding for some of the months. Obviously improved EAFs from the fleet and large PV, but we do believe there has been curtailment. And we also are really concerned that there's been a loss of demand. And this obviously is going to have huge impacts on GDP growth going forward, which then talks to a very different world that we are living in. So this is a bit of granularity around the type of technology on the left there. It's up and down based on transmission constraints and based on real projects achieving CODs. And then on the right, we've tried to split it between the government programs, current ones where they've named already the clients and they're in progress, private sector ones, and then as well as getting to finalization for some of the REAP 7s and the other bid window BESS projects. We do expect there to be more BESS projects rolled out from government. I know there's a talk of a bid window 4. In our view, that's really needed to support the grid. So, and I think in many cases that is, I don't think we need another REAP round in my view. I think private sector can cover that. But in terms of supporting the grid with large-scale BESS, for us, it's desperately needed, at least in the short term, to complement before we get larger other dispatchable generation, because it's all about the energy mix. It's not one size fits all. I've touched on demand and really what is the answer and where it's going. As I've mentioned, we have serious concerns around the demand recently and how does the current demand affect future growth in demand. We all hope that we would see an increase in electrical demand, driving electrical growth, EV cars and stuff like that. But we are aware that with significant commodity volatility, that some of the large beneficiation entities are reducing demand or maybe don't have longevity anymore in terms of their long-term demand. And I think this is going to play a key issue in terms of trying to plot the market demand forecast going forward. Now, what we've also done is we model this on a sort of 24 hours in the bay, 12 months in the year, because we are focused more on the cost of energy than the actual small imbalances in the market. But we have modeled a typical day in the year in 2024, 2030, and 2040 with really small, this is the time of use graph. You can see primarily the coal coming in, and this is an average of the year. So this doesn't differentiate the material differences between summer and winter. It's purely done for indicative purposes. Our data we use for our clients is actually a data book. And to some extent, we just on the line, a little bit of curtailment in the early evening, as always expected because of this demand growth. If you do this on a regional basis, these things bounce all over the place in terms of what's available. And then the NCTSA presentation from yesterday, I believe, or earlier in the week, actually noted that we achieved 22% renewable penetration on the 20th of February at 3 p.m. So I think we are making huge strides in getting some of that decarbonization. Unfortunately, going forward, I think we're still going to be increasing the penetration over these times of the day and probably less in the times of the day where we really need it. So we have lots of work still to do, as we know. Going to 2030, we've now built a lot of the renewables, not as quickly as we'd all hoped. We're getting nicer penetration now in the middle of the day. We're getting a lot more green in the bottom right. But now we're starting to see, based on a 2030 national demand, we start to see issues in the early morning, issues in the early evening, where we have shortcomings between demand and supply. Once again, this is a representative of an average year for indication purposes, but seasonality plays a key role. And then going to 2040, we're still seeing issues in the early morning, but now we're seeing significant increase or excess energy in the middle of the day. We are seeing that already in the grid, but this is just where it starts getting really material. We actually see it earlier in our projections in 2040. I've just tried to show 10-year chunks. And now we're really hitting the outside points of how much renewable we can achieve. And we do have large-scale BESS already in the case. You can see on the bottom right here, things are coming through, but we need a lot more because we're still not really getting to the hours of the day that we really need. And we're getting to dark green in the middle of the day as expected, but we're not really able to get further than that. So this is the basis of the projections. This is some of the grid balancing constraints we have. So if you look, there's different flows based on different times of the year. So this is all key and happy to do follow-up discussions with the various people who might be interested in this more detailed analysis. But we were here for load shedding, Chris, that you mentioned. And there's not one answer. There's a scatter graph of a number of answers. I've only showed an extract of an 80-page PowerPoint presentation we recently did for a client. So we've built the tool. We're trying to go forward and model it. As with everything, it's only as good as the assumptions are in there. We are conscious that the assumptions are not perfect, but they're definitely better than we had a year ago. And in many cases, our model has mimicked the past. We went back to 23 and tried to do an actual versus budget, but our model has not perfectly mimicked the no load shedding for the last 140 days or so. So we haven't projected what was actually being experienced. And I think that's also very much feeding into our comments earlier around, is it demand reduction, which hopefully is not ongoing, or is it also driven by curtailment? And speaking to some of our clients, these are the expensive winter months. Typically, maintenance is done over these times. So I think there is an element of curtailment. But once again, demand reduction is a concern. But going forward, we still see very much as renewables are coming further online, the fact that we don't have large-scale dispatchable generation coming into the mix, we have this significant mismatch between different technologies at different time of the days. And there's a very good graph from the transmission operator that is not in the slide deck that shows how on 5-minute intervals, how they're trying to balance the grid. I think they're doing a great job with limited available technologies at the moment to do it. And if you go into the analysis, so this is an indication of I use 2036 as an example, and I know that's way into the future, but try not to give too much away in the early stages. And we still do see, with the coal being decommissioned, even with dispatchable generation coming on, we still do see that there will be load shedding requirements. Obviously, a lot of this is historically has been taken up by OCG utilization. So if you increase OCG to utilization like we had last year, you can cover some of this. In some cases, we just don't have enough energy to actually meet these requirements, and we need to use it from CCGTs is being considered more at a base load level in the current modeling, which I know needs to change. And then obviously on the right-hand side, we have significant surpluses of energy, which will probably result in constraints in the grid or potentially export of this energy into the SAP. And I guess that's one of the shortcomings in our modeling, which we are working on, is we probably need to model SAP as a whole to get a real view on what the load shedding will be. But as I said, this is not one answer. This is one of very many answers that are there. And our clients are trying to use this as part of some of their thinking and their planning, both for on-site security as well as into the future. So my summary, Chris, because I know you're on to stop me there, is we are conscious that the assumptions are not perfect, but I think we have some very good assumptions on specific projects that we've used. The amount of publicly available data is vastly superior than we had previously. Yes, there's always shortcomings, but we think we have a fairly balanced view of what's going on, how we're using these forecasts. So obviously the supply-demand imbalances, what are the future energy prices? This is very much linking to the multi-market model, estimate time of use, cost of energy, a discount or a premium based on excess or curtailed, very much being used in load shedding scenarios, and then trying to figure out this balancing market going forward there. And then, where can we improve? The transmission and load zone are giving us different numbers. We need to consider liquidity as a concept. We haven't really taken into account long duration storage. That might be a bit of a game changer. We need to really figure out how the multi-market model affects this. We're still really just testing the boundaries. What is the value of carbon? And then very much also, who's going to fund and what funding instruments are available, because the current vanilla senior debt facilities we see are definitely not going to fit the world that we see into the future.